What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Simply Satisfied. I am your host, Greg, and today I'm joined by someone very special that I have been super excited to do this episode about. His name is Joel Bouchard, very French. He's an amazing guy, and the reason I'm so excited to do this episode is it might be a little different than what you're used to hearing, because we're going to dive a little less into the practical and a little more into the philosophical. At least that's what I hope we're going to dive into. And without further ado, just welcome to the show, Joel.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. Philosophical is where I live, so I'm happy to hear that. And I'm excited.
Yes. So if somebody were to ask you, what do you do? What would you say?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know what I love about being somebody who has a philosophy podcast is that I get a lot of questions like this. I just had somebody on my the podcast Facebook Messenger message me yesterday. Go, hey, do you think AI is sentient? I go, oh boy, that's a tough one right off the bat. But yeah, no, I think that the simple answer is, what do I do? Live. I think and that sounds overly simplistic, right? A lot of people go, okay, well, duh, we're all living. But I don't think that we all are in the same way. And I think that that's kind of an important qualifier, right? I think that that's something that I consciously think about every day, right? Not all, right? Because we're human, we're fallible, but in a lot of the decisions that I make and a lot of the things that I do, that's what I'm always thinking about is, what am I doing with this one life?
Yeah.
Or, consequently, one of my most recent episodes we did on our show, we were doing this fun series, right, where we, me and my resident expert, surprise each other with philosophical thought experiments, and see what the other one thinks about it just off the cuff with no preparation. And one of the ones that he surprised me with was Nietzsche's recurrent universe. And in that thought experiment, you have this supernatural being that appears to you and says, you're doomed to live this exact life over and over with zero variation. You have from the beginning on, you will infinitely, right? Forever and ever, you will always live this life that you have. And the question was, how does that impact you? And what I brought up in that episode was, I think that there's really one of two ways you can go with it. I think that there's some people that would be, and I think all of us to some extent would be terrified, just terrified right off the bat, because you're thinking about regrets that you have in the past, or, bad things that have happened to you that were outside of your control.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the next most logical thought is, I've got to do whatever I can to make the rest of this life the best I possibly can, right?
Yeah.
And so if that's the approach you would take if you knew that you were going to live it infinitely into the future and you had lived it infinitely into the past, why isn't that the approach you take with the one life that you think you have, right? Regardless of what your view on the afterlife is or anything like that, all you're guaranteed is this. So why don't you do the best to make it, the best it can be? So,
Wow.
yeah, that was probably more of an answer than you bargained for with the question. But
No, and that's exactly what I was hoping for, because usually I ask, I don't usually ask that question a lot, but when I ask that question, people are like, "Oh, I'm a therapist," or "Oh, I help people do this," and I like, it's not that. It's not that answer, and it's not as philosophical, and I love that answer because I spent a lot of the last couple of years diving into philosophy, not super deep. Compared to a lot of people out there that I've talked to, I only dove surface level. And it's scary to think how much is out there, but also awesome. So, go ahead.
yeah, no, I think that we can all only get surface level. There's so many different ways of thought, so many different things that you can consider that it's hard for us to get anywhere. And my answer will change depending on the day, right? Depending on the day, depending on my mood, depending on who's asking me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's like I'm not into this, so I'll just give you whatever my career is. Other times, if I know you're a specific type of person, or you have a specific type of interest, I might tailor some of what I say to that. But Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm at today.
Okay, so flip the question. You just got poured on with rain. Yeah, you went through a terrible breakup. You lost your job. You're having one of the worst days of your life, and somebody stops you and says, "Hey, man, what do you do?"
Yeah, that's probably one of the days where I just give them the occupation, just kind of the stock answer everybody gives. I go, yeah, I'm a production manager at a manufacturing facility, and
Okay.
just try to move on with my day. I'm 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 an introvert, right? So usually I'm not one to make a whole lot of small talk. Um, and that's the funny thing about that question, right? Is what do you do? Is it can be a small talk question, but it can
Yeah.
also be one of the deepest questions you can be asked. It depends on how you interpret it, really.
Yeah. Okay, so give me flipping the script a little bit. Give me your best definition, like your own personal definition of philosophy.
Of philosophy. Oh, okay. I think that philosophy is really the rationale behind the things that we think and do. That's probably the most basic,
Okay.
most zoomed out um, definition I could give.
Okay, so the rationale between the things we think and do. Okay, so how would you separate that from psychology?
Yeah, psychology. So they're very closely related, which is why I study it. There's a couple reasons I don't actually. So I'm working on a PhD in psychology. There's a reason I'm not working on a PhD in philosophy, and that's because, um, it's not a lucrative career field, right? And the U.S. Army paid for a lot of my schooling, so it's not one of those things that they were really jumping at the bit to let me to study. So the difference is really a lot of the differences are in the methodology that you use to study the phenomenon, the scope of the phenomenon, and the applicability of the phenomenon. So, to break that down a little bit more, one of the things I love to tell people about philosophy is that philosophy is everybody's favorite topic. They just don't know it, right? Philosophy has the world's worst marketer, right? Because everybody thinks it's about angry old guys and dusty books, but it's not, right? Philosophy is really um, about anything is philosophical, and everybody's a philosopher, right? It doesn't matter how close-minded you are, or how unintellectual you are. We all have at least one thing that we really care deeply about, and that we really find to be very nuanced and very thought-provoking, even when nobody else does, right? And that's a philosophical way of thinking. And if you think that way, you're a philosopher of some type, right? So those are the bare qualifications. And philosophy kind of bookends science, is what I like to say as well. I have a lot of these little sayings that I've come up with over the years of doing the podcast. But
Okay.
so philosophy bookends science, and what I mean by that is all science comes from philosophy, and at the cutting edge, all science devolves back into philosophy, right? So what that means is that in the middle, what you have is psychology in this case, which is a systematic study of a phenomenon. So human thinking, right? Philosophy is a enormously broad topic, right? It's not just about human thought like psychology. It's also about, hey, what happened before the universe was created? Hey, does good and bad really exist, or is that just something we make up? It revolves around a lot of things that can even be outside of the human being, right? What is there actually such a thing as good art, or is it just subjective? Psychology, that's all about the human being, and it even goes beyond cognition and consciousness, which is a bit abstract, to things that can be measurably studied, scientifically, right? Neuroscience, there's
Yeah.
imaging studies, all of those types of things you can do. So yeah, there's a scientific method behind psychology, um, but they're very closely related. You would not have psychology without philosophy, and there's some aspects of psychology that are still heavily philosophical in some regard, mainly consciousness studies and that type of thing.
Okay. I like that answer. I also like your saying about the bookends. um, Now, you've probably read a lot of philosophy, right?
Yeah. I mean, much like you, I'd say I'm just scratching the surface, but I probably more than the average Joe.
Who's your favorite philosopher?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Um, I think that a good personal philosophy is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. You have different tools for different cases, right?
Yeah,
Um, so it's the same thing, right? I think that you could ask somebody who their favorite psychologist is, right? And they could say, William James or whoever, right? Sigmund Freud or, anybody. With philosophy, it's a little bit different because, you have some philosophers that did think about almost everything, and really that's like Plato and Aristotle and those early guys. But by and large, by the time you get to like the Enlightenment, even guys like Kant and Descartes and some of these other guys, Rousseau, they were pretty broad in what they studied, but they still didn't take into account every single facet of what philosophy can encompass. So you can have a favorite aesthetic philosopher, a favorite physics philosopher, or a favorite ethics philosopher, that type of thing. But man, by and large, if you're looking for somebody that's really trying to encompass all of it, I think that you sort of get pigeonholed into those early philosophers, like, oh, are you Platonic or are you Aristotelian? And to
yeah.
some extent, you can go east as well. You can go over and look at Taoism versus Confucianism, for instance, and get a broad picture like that as well. But it's a really tricky question.
Okay, and that's it's suffice it to say, like I don't think I could even answer that question. So it's
That
hard, and you
that
you you do take it kind of case by case or what you're looking at. So yeah,
Yeah, and that's one of the frustrating things about talking to philosophers is we rarely give straight answers on a lot of stuff. There's a lot of qualified answers, and some people find that pretty unsatisfying. But for me, it's mostly about the journey of exploring topics than trying to come to some firm grasp of saying that planting a flag and saying I can know something.
well that's what gripped me about philosophy and even like psychology. Like reading about it was like I come from an industry where when once one I came from the fitness industry a long time ago, and like once one person got results with like keto, for example, there was no other way other than keto. You try to
Hmm.
convince that person that there was other ways, that there was other ways of thinking about it, and it was just like, nope, that's just not how it works. And so when I started reading philosophy and psychology, and it was like, well, there's always a different way to think of it, and I was like, okay, now I can finally relate to this, um,
Yeah.
and I started having those conversations with different types of people, and started having conversations about, how you're just scratching the surface. You never really know what you truly don't know, and it's just every problem you solve just unleashes a branch of all new problems and everything else. And I was like, okay, this is like I like reading about this stuff. I like learning about this stuff. I like having these conversations. And so, go ahead. Yep.
So I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. No,
Yeah.
all
No.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say was that like the difference in the fields. Like I went from all the conversations were this is what works, this is what I know what works. I'm not going to deviate from it. And it wasn't just fitness. It was mindset. It was what people like their habits. It was people's routines, people's ways of thinking. Like everyone around me had a very scarce, not a very abundant mindset where it was like I'm not going to get outside the box. And so that was to go from that to like there's a world outside the box. Ooh, hit me like a train.
Yeah. Fitness, and I think fitness is highly philosophical, right? I've been very interested in fitness. Well, geez, for like a quarter century. I mean, I've been lifting weights since I was 11 years old, and so and I know exactly what you're saying, especially when you get. I got a little bit older than that, and you start talking about supplements or different workout routines or that sort of stuff. Yeah, it is easy for people to chase fads, right? What's the newest thing?
Yeah.
And that's where some scientific literacy helps, right? Because, just asking basic questions like, okay, well, who funded this study that said that this supplement works? Oh, was it the supplement company? Or there's different things like p hacking, ways of sort of messing with the statistics to make something look more
Yeah.
effective than it is. But then there's seriously philosophical questions, right, that are important, right? I think that there's a lot of philosophers, like I was mentioning earlier, right? People think philosophers, they think like schlubby old dudes, and that's a pretty accurate picture
Yeah.
of it. And in my mind, right, when I'm thinking philosophically, I go, well, what makes me a good philosopher? If I trace that line of reasoning all the way back, I go, I have to have a strong mind. And part of having a healthy brain is having a healthy body. As a matter of fact, speaking of the intersection of psychology and philosophy, there was a recent psychology study that came out that indicated the number one thing you can do to improve your cognition is to exercise, right? Number one's exercise. Number two is not smoke. So those two right there. So, if I want to be a good philosopher, if I want to be a good PhD student, if I want to have healthy cognition, the best thing I can do is have a healthy body. So,
Yeah.
yeah, fitness, highly philosophical. What that can guide your whole approach. So now it's okay. So how do I implement that? How do I balance cardio versus strength training? How does my specific physiology, right? I'm an ectomorph, so I'm
Yep.
5'11", and
I've
like I
been
said,
there.
been working out since I was 11, and I can't crack 165 pounds, but and so those are things to take into account, though, right? If you're expecting to look like Arnold when you're lifting, you're going to go down some bad roads to look like Arnold. So you really have to think critically, right? So critical thinking and asking basic questions and evaluating literature. These are high level intellectual activities that serious fitness professionals have to take into account.
Yeah. And I could totally relate to the ectomorph. And I wanted to look like Arnold. I wanted to look like the bodybuilders. And I went down some dark roads to try and get there. I did get up to like 215, but it was not a good 215. And I was eating so much food.
Yeah, yeah. When you're not meant to be big, it's surprising how much you have to eat. And then everybody who's not an ectomorph, like they look at you with disgust for complaining about having to eat so much. But it really is kind of it is a suffering of its own kind, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Everyone like, I eat Taco Bell and I lose weight, and people are like, "Oh, I wish I could have that." I'm like, I wish I could just not lose weight every day.
Yeah, yeah,
But I mean, and that's a great way of putting it. That fitness can be philosophical, and seeing that philosophy has more to do. And I think, this is what I took from what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong. Philosophy has a lot to, if and psychology has a lot to do with being more open minded.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. That's actually something that I'm studying right now. Is sort of this juxtaposition between open-mindedness and a need for cognitive closure, is what they call it. That's the other sort of operationalized construct that is opposed to it. Uh, so yeah, need for cognitive closure. That's the desire to have answers to questions, right? And to want to know something. And openness to experience is just, hey, I'm just here for the ride, right? I'm just kind of open to what's going on.
Yeah,
Um, and how those two relate to different different constructs. And you can basically relate those two to anything, right?
yeah,
Um, and so, fitness could be an example, right? Um, how much of it is needing to know the answers in order to achieve whatever your fitness goals are, and how much of it is being open to actually experiencing how your body feels, and being open to accepting the reality of the body that you are genetically given, and how to adapt to that to achieve. I don't even think you ever achieve your goals in fitness, right? It's something that's a constant journey,
yeah,
and in that way, it's sort of a good kind of parallel for life in general, and every journey that we go on, right? You there's no there's no winning. Life isn't a game. Like, it's not like the scoreboard clicks to 0 and then you celebrate your victory. No, you're dead. So you have to celebrate the journey. You have to like what you're doing along the way, and you have to do it in a responsible manner, a way that's healthy for you. So yeah.
I like that. The whole scoreboard idea, and like I've heard scoreboard examples, of people like, I can't remember the exact one, but I've heard scoreboard. I've never heard that one before. Of like, it's not going to click, and you celebrate, that you are dead. And I think that's really important to think about for a lot of people. Is that I always said in fitness, like people would be like, "Oh, I'm maintaining," and I'm like, maintenance is like it's a myth. Like, you're never truly maintaining. You might be maintaining weight, sure. Like, you get to your goal weight, and you're like, okay, I'm going to stay right here, but like things still have to change, and that's the basis of what you just said. And the philosophy of life is just, things are ever changing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very Eastern philosophy view, which I enjoy. But yeah, life is change, right? Stability is an illusion, right? Even if we sit here having this discussion, our bodies are, by weight, made up of more of cells that are not human than are human, which is a wild thing.
Huh.
You have intestinal bacteria and other things that live symbiotically inside of your body and have chemical reactions and other things that happen that you could not live without them going on.
Yeah.
Um, and we sit here just kind of unaware of it and not really caring about it too much and going about our lives. But then on the fitness level, like you said, you get to be my age, like late 30s. And if you get into the mindset of, yeah, I'm just going to maintain my fitness, really what that means is you're going to decline, because your mindset might be maintained, but your physical body is already in decline at this point. And so, yeah, an important part of fitness is always pushing yourself, right? It's always trying to, even if you can't beat what you did when you were younger, it's always just trying to beat or do the best that you can that day. And if you're doing the best you can do that day, then you're doing the best for you. And that might even look like maintaining, right? When you get to be my age, maybe I've benched my highest number. Maybe I will never bench higher than I do now. But even if I can never crack that number again for 10 or 15 years, that's not maintaining, because I'm pushing myself every day, right? So that's a little bit different. I think with fitness, you're always in a competition with yourself, and so you just do your best to push yourself to your limits. And I think that's kind of where you find the best version of yourself, whether you're on the upswing, a plateau, or eventually, like we all will, be on a decline.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because we got into the topic of fitness and we got into the topic of like maintenance and life is ever changing. Do you believe in balance? Not just fitness wise, but like in life.
Yeah. Um. Hmm. I think that the notion of balance, where it gets tricky, is that it's dichotomous, right? It indicates kind of a scale where you have something on one side and you have something on the other. And I think that the problem with it is that uh, we're balancing a lot more than two things. So what does balance look like in our lives? And yeah, I don't know if balance as an abstraction exists in our sort of subjective lives, but I think that the closest we get is a state of, I guess, kind of a peaceful equilibrium, right? Um, I think that on our good days we can experience things where we know we're at our we know we're doing the things to keep ourselves at our physical best. We know we're doing the things to keep ourselves at our mental sharpness. We know we're doing the things to keep ourselves socially engaged with our friends and family, and we know we're pursuing ideas that make us feel creative and sort of spiritually engaged in those types of things. So I think when we have those sorts of feelings, I think that that's probably the closest we can come to saying that we're balanced. But I don't know. I'm not sure if it's an accurate description or not. I'd never really thought of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a term that some people would say they love it, and some people would be like, "Oh, that's made up. Like, there's no such thing." Um,
Yeah, I think about my own life because I have so many different things that I do, and so balance looks different, right? During the school year, I'm consumed with doing PhD work, and so I don't play as many musical instruments as I normally do, and I don't paint as much as I want to, and I don't write or do those sorts of things. And then summer comes along or winter break comes along, and I'll spend some time uh, making an album, and that's the only thing I'm doing. But it's
mhm.
for a different period of time. Or I might write every single day, or I work out every single day, or I see friends once a week. So there's sort of different rhythms to those things, right? Whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, um, and it doesn't necessarily mean that one trumps the other or or that they're out of balance, right? But I think that, and it's probably unique to every person what that looks like, what a healthy balance it looks like. Not many people would say, um, but there might be somebody, right, that says, "Oh, I'm okay seeing my best friend once a year, but I need to play guitar every day." Whereas, I'm somebody where I go, I'm okay picking up the guitar, once a week, um, but I have to study my schoolwork every day, that type of thing. So I think that's where the concept of balance gets tricky, right? Balance is like this sort of 1-to-1 ratio. And I think when we think about all of the different things that comprises the human experience, um, there's different rhythms to all the different areas that are kind of idiosyncratic. It's unique to each person.
Yeah. So before we get into some of the like really juicy questions, I want to know a little bit of what led you down this path. I know you've mentioned for the audience that you are a musician and that you are a student, forever student. But some of the best ones. But what led you down this path of becoming who you are today?
Yeah, man, that's a really good question. I think that if a lot of us could answer that question, we'd probably be different people than the ones that we are.
Yeah.
And I might be the rare exception because I really do enjoy my life and the way that it turned out, um, while totally recognizing that I don't think I'm primarily responsible for it. There's so many things that go into making a person, right? There's the genetic component that we don't have any control over. There's the environmental component that we have some limited control over. We can't control where we're born or who we're involved with, that sort of thing. Um, and there's a subconscious experience. All of the things that are going on inside your head that you're unaware of, and then there's this very narrow part that you have some awareness about and you have some control over. And it's difficult because that question asks you about um, kind of the whole thing, when really all you have the insight into is that little part that you have control over. But no, I think back about it. My mom, I think, had a huge impact on it. She was somebody who kind of ingrained in me the idea that school wasn't from 7 to 3. Learning was just all the time. So we were, after school, we were always going to museums. We were always going on field trips. She called them field trips, and we were just driving in the car, going to places, and
Yeah.
whether it was a farm or our local dam,
A literal
whatever.
field. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And and she just talked really excited about everything, and that wore off on me. If you think about kids, right? What's your stereotypical kid always saying? Where does that come from? Why is that? What's going on? They're always asking questions, right? And so if you don't stifle that, right? If you have an adult who encourages that sort of thing and kind of talks excitedly about everything, it wears off on you. And I think that I'm kind of the product of that
Yeah.
to an extent. So that's where it started. And then there's different little stories that go along with each thing. With music, that's kind of a fun one because I didn't really listen to music when I was younger, which is strange. A lot of people think that's strange. I think I started listening to music when I was 13 and it was classical.
Really?
And then when I was 15 or 16, three of my friends, none of us played any instruments, but we decided like we were going to start a band. And so we just went, okay, you'll play guitar and you'll play drums and you'll play. So I got guitar, and my brother did play guitar. So that's the reason I got it. I got selected to play guitars because I had access to one.
Yeah.
So I taught myself. He didn't really have much interest in teaching me or anything. But yeah, I taught myself. We all taught ourselves to play. We started up a band. We won some battle of the bands after a few years. We recorded some songs on a cassette tape, which tells you how old I am.
Wow.
But yeah, and so anyway, so when I was 19, these guys were a couple years older than me. My drummer got married really young, and my bass player moved out of state to go to college. And so I was really just starting to like enjoy music at 19, and I go, oh man, like I don't want this to end. And so I took my whole life savings up to that point and I went to Guitar Center and I just bought everything. I bought a drum set, I bought a bass guitar, I bought a recording interface. I bought all the stuff to build a computer. Um, and I just taught myself all the stuff.
Really?
And yeah, years later, now I've got 5 albums on the internet and a bunch of EPs and a bunch of singles and stuff. And so that's just I like that, giving people that story for several reasons. One is because it sort of demonstrates that the only thing stopping you from doing something is the idea in your head that you can't do it. Because I'll tell you right now, I'm not any more special than anybody else, especially when it comes to music, right? I got a really late start. Uh, I didn't really have any sort of training, but I just wanted to do it. And I took every failure as an opportunity to learn something new about it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes those failures are catastrophic, right? I just built a new computer and, I was trying to install new software and I got blue screen of death. And now I'm looking up how to get into the BIOS and, type in prompts and stuff to fix it. So, that's really, the journey is always filled with mistakes, but you never fail until you stop failing, right? So you just, that's that. I love that story for that reason, right? Nobody taught me how to play drums or bass or guitar or keyboards. Nobody taught me how to build a computer or mix or master or do any of that stuff. Obviously there's tutorials online and you meet people that give you tips, but primarily, you can do a lot of things. You can figure out a lot of things on your own, if you have the motivation to do it, and if you don't get discouraged by running into obstacles. So that's sort of encapsulation of my whole life journey to some extent. So I won't go through all the stories for all of them, but yeah, that's where my love of learning comes from. That's where music comes from. Yeah, painting. I've written one book, and I'm working on a couple other treatises. Working on PhD in psychology. I'm a local government official for my village. I'm, like I said, I'm the production manager for a factory. Just a few different things. So I'm a podcaster, right? I got a philosophy podcast, and that was another one where I just go, after I built my recording studio, I'm looking around. I go, hey, I have all the stuff here to do a podcast. Like, why don't I do one?
Yeah.
Like, didn't need to know anything about it. You just dive in and start doing it.
Yeah. Okay. And so you do all this stuff. It's, I think that the big thing, like I ask a lot of people, that, what led them to where they're at today. And there's always a recurring theme, whether they tell it in stories or whether they tell it in lessons or whether there's always a recurring theme, and your recurring theme is the only thing stopping you for whatever you want to do is the thinking that you can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
And as a matter of fact, kind of where I learned that along the way is because I wasn't always this way, right? And you can say that at any point in your life, right? Because we talked about, life has changed, so you're never always some way. You're always changing. But early on in life, I lived a very privileged life, right? I had parents that loved me and invested a lot in me, and had things pretty easy. But we didn't have a whole lot of money, so I went to community college for essentially free, and you know, but then after that, I go, oh man, if I'm going to go to school, I have to take out student loans, and I'm not really interested in that. So I go, I'll join the army. Why not?
Yeah.
And that's where you run into some very difficult things. And I remember the last portion of basic training. They call it Victory Forge. You have 5 days where you're just out and basically you're fighting all day. You're shooting blanks, running exercises, and then over the course of 4 nights, you don't really get to sleep. They just attack you all night. So you march for like 12 miles in 80 pounds of gear, and then you get attacked, and then you go to sleep, and then you get attacked, then you wake up, then you march, and you do this for so many days. And I remember, and I think it was the third or fourth day that the chaplain came to visit us, and he goes, a lot of people find this so difficult, and they think that they can't go on. He's like, and I always tell him the story about there's this one girl where he's like, I can't interfere, I can't help you in any way, because that's the whole point, is we're trying to prove you can be a soldier, right? He said, but it was the last day, and we were on the last march, and it was an 8 mile march, and they were on mile like 7 3/4, and this girl just collapsed, and she sat down, and she just started crying, and she said, I can't do it, I can't go any farther. And he was trying to encourage her, he was trying to tell her, you can do it, just a little bit longer, you could. And she wouldn't, and he couldn't tell her that right around the bend was the end. That was the finish line, and she didn't graduate. She didn't go on. And that really got me thinking, how much of the difficulty that we face is not actually physical difficulty. It's just roadblocks in our mind that we've set up, because after my experience in being in the Army, what I realized is, looking back at my life pre-Army, there were so many things that I thought were hard that weren't hard. And there were so many things that I gave up on that, I were not difficult, right? I could have continued to go on with them.
Yeah.
And so that's something that post-Army, I've always kind of carried that lesson along, right? Like I said, you get knocked down, you get back up. As long as you get back up, then you haven't failed. You've just learned a lesson, right? So yeah, that's kind of something that I keep in mind.
So you would say that you didn't learn that until you were in the Army?
Yeah, I would think so. And like I said, I think there was a couple factors with that. One was sort of just the easy nature of my life. And I think that the other part is, I have some natural talent. I don't know what other way to put it. I have some things that have made life easy for me. And what you realize is that that's not the kind of life that you want.
Yeah.
And especially being an introvert, if you're an introvert, and you're somebody who's kind of smart and kind of physically gifted and kind of good with people, then what happens is you become really risk averse. You go, okay, well, I know that I'm good enough to do these things, and if I do these things, I'll have a nice, comfortable life, and I won't have to worry about anything.
Yeah.
And that seems nice until you realize that your life is just kind of passing you by, right? There's all these things that you could explore and that you could do that you're not doing because you're afraid of failing, and it's one of those things that I was one of those people before I joined the Army where I had straight A's my whole life. I've never gotten a B in anything, right? Until a couple semesters ago, I realized at that point, I was like, this is something that would have really bugged me
Yep.
years ago. This would have been world altering, and all for what? It's really not that important in the grand scheme of things, so letting go some of those rigid mindsets of, defining yourself in a way that is unrealistic or is, kind of opposed to your own growth.
Wow. And that's like it's a, you know, a lot of people talk about the art of letting go, and I can relate to what you're saying with there's things that I do now that I look back and I'm like, man, I just did in an hour what used to take me a month. Or I just did with such less effort or such less emotion where I used to like for to give you an example, I do video editing on the side, right? And I have a guy that I used to edit his videos years ago, and then I took the time, did my thing, and then I came back to him, and he was like, "All right, I need you to edit these videos, and just like don't even think about it," because he knew that I was a chronic overthinker, and he would give me videos to edit, and I would like want them to be perfect, and I would overthink them, and it would take me weeks to edit one video, and I would throw it up there, and it wouldn't get what I wanted or what I expected, and then half the time I would delete it because it would be like, that wasn't good enough. And he never told me that. Like nobody ever told me that. Maybe it got a bad comment of like, what is this? But but now like he gave me some video and he was like, all right, just edit. He told me, he's like, don't think about it, just edit it, throw it up there, we'll refine afterwards. And hours later, I was like, all right, it's up, and he was like, seriously? And I was like, yeah. Why? And he was like, no, I'm not used to it. I was like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah. And music is one that's great like that, where I have a lot of friends who do the same thing that I do, but none of them have ever released a song because it's never done. Like it has to be perfect. And what they don't realize is that it's never going to be perfect. And so for me, I just work really fast. Like I'll do an album from beginning to end in like a week. And so that's writing everything, that's playing all the instruments, that's mixing all the stuff, and I'll release it. And it's definitely not perfect. Um, and it goes through a pretty predictable cycle, right? I'll release it and I'm jazzed about it. And then probably a year later, I'm filled with regret. I go, oh man, I would have done this and this and this different. And then a year or two later, I listen back and I go, you know what? I like this just the way it is, not because it's perfect, but because it's a snapshot of my life at that time, right? This is what I knew about mixing. This is what I knew about guitar. This is what I was feeling in my songwriting at that point. I'm not trying to overthink my message and put it into lyrics and essentially put something out there that doesn't actually accurately represent who I am, right? It's just more authentic.
yeah,
And in order to do that, right, not only do you have to overcome the perfectionist mindset, right, and really just engage in, like we were talking about before, thinking of life uh, as a game, not like a professional athlete does, but like a kid does.
yeah,
A kid just loves running around, feeling the wind in their hair, and kicking a soccer ball as hard as they can. They don't care what the score is. That's the way you need to think about life, right? Because then when the game ends, it doesn't matter what the score is. And so the other part of that is, yeah, if you decide to put things out publicly, you don't have to, right? I think that if I were to never release anything publicly, it wouldn't invalidate my position as a musician. Um, but if you do put things out publicly, right, some people won't listen to them. You might not get the response you wanted. Some people will actually say that stuff is trash, right? Or they disagree with you. And it's important to realize that, like, yeah, that's everybody's allowed to have that opinion. And just really taking a mindset, to me, like nothing's competitive anymore. Everything's collaborative. And so if somebody says to me, like, especially with philosophy, like philosophy's, very contentious. And so if somebody says to me that they disagree with me, my first inclination now isn't to fight them and prove that I'm right. It's to say, oh, okay, well, why do you think the way that you do? Or, when I go to put something out, I'll say, yeah, I could be totally off base about it, but this is what I think, right? Because
mm-hmm.
my goal is to get at the truth. It's not to be right. If I'm wrong, but I find out what the truth is, well, then I won, right? Because I got some knowledge out of it. So that's kind of the way that I like to approach things.
That's awesome. That's such a good way to approach things. And I mean, like imagine if everybody could think that way.
Yeah, yeah. It's I don't know. It's so funny thinking back, right? Because when I was younger, I was very competitive. Always wanted to win, and I was really good, right? I had a lot of physical and psychological skills that gave me an extra edge, and so I mean, when I played baseball, I stole home plate twice. you know, when I played soccer, I scored as the goalie 3 different times.
Jeez.
Like so love doing that stuff. Really competitive. Nowadays, it's like, no, I don't want to compete with anybody on anything. Like even if I know you're wrong, I don't want to prove that you're wrong. Like I just want to give you some insight. I want to give you a new way of thinking about things so we can have a discussion so that we together can get somewhere.
Yeah.
And I'm open to me being wrong, because I know that I'm wrong about a lot of stuff. Because when I look back at my life, up to this point, I see a lot of times that I was wrong, right? So I'm totally open to being wrong. I just want to find the best way to do things, and I want to find the truth, and I don't want it to be a big serious thing. I want to have fun doing it. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Joel, where you've been, where you are now, and where you're going, all of that culminates into a really big question, which it's like the biggest philosophical question you can answer or ask is, what is the meaning of life?
Yeah. I mean, the meaning of life is what you make it, right? I don't know that there is any overarching objective meaning. And if there is, I don't know that there's any way that we'd be able to discover it.
So you're
And
you're
so,
telling me it's not 42?
no, unlike the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I don't believe that. I could be wrong. I might just not have the insight, but um, no, I think that meaning is necessarily subjective, and so I can say that both as a philosopher and as a psychologist, right? We have sections of our brain that make meaning of things, right? We
Yeah.
have our dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and other areas that sort of integrate information and provide us with emotional and cognitive salience about certain stimuli that we're encountering. So meaning it's all inside your own head, right? There's nothing out there that's meaningful. And some people find that really scary, right? They go, oh my gosh, there's no, like, this is all meaningless. But it's not all meaningless. There's that part inside your head that tells you what's meaningful. And I think that that's important. I think that I don't think that is invalidated by the fact that there either is no objective meaning or we have no way of interpreting it or finding it. I think that's great because in my mind, I'm somebody who, like you said, very high on open to experience, very
Mm-hmm.
high on the journey, the process. And so I love mysteries, right? I love not knowing what is going to happen after I die or what's going to happen at the end of the universe. To me, that's invigorating. And I am just really grateful that I get to spend the rest of my life thinking about the answers. And, how boring would it be if you were to have those answers already,
Yeah.
what would be the point? What would be the point in going on if you already knew all the answers? But that, again, that's a perspective shift, right? Not a lot of people think that way. And so they get caught up in trying to put meaning outside of themselves as something that they're trying to, attain, or something that they can, with just enough, investigation or just enough, thinking they can reach. Um, but you never can. It's already there. You're already making meaning, and so the meaning that I make is that the universe is a big mystery that I want to have fun exploring. So yeah, that's kind of the the long answer, I guess.
Wow. That's that's I've never heard that take. Like I've never heard that perspective before.
Yeah, it's again, it's one that some people love it and some people hate it because when you ask questions people want to ask the big questions of the philosophers and get the big answers. Lots of times asking the big question, uh, you realize there is no big answer,
Yeah.
and that's part of philosophy is, you know, you're not out to prove things. You're just out to think about them deeply and try to come away with some insight, And I think that's ultimately what thinking about that question for a long time has gotten me is, is there an answer? I guess that I gave an answer of some type, but really the answer is mostly an insight into, um, several different things. One is, yeah, the history and the nature of philosophy, but one is also the machinations of human neuropsychology.
Yeah. Okay, I got two more questions. Two big
Okay.
questions, two huge questions,
All
right?
right.
And the reason about to ask this next one is because the reason I love philosophy so much, or the reason I love psychology, the reason I love both, the reason I love science, is because it, like you, it makes me think, it makes me question, it makes me experiment, wonder about what is new, what is undiscovered, what is yet to know, all this other stuff. Um, what do you think? Do you know who Alan Watts is?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, one of his most famous lines, and I bet you could probably quote it. I might butcher it. You know what I'm talking about?
He had a lot of them, so I'm not sure which one you're thinking about.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about thinking on this show, right? And Alan Watts has a line, and I know I'm going to butcher it, and it's a person who thinks all the time has no room for anything but thought, and so he loses touch with reality, and he lives in just an illusion, or something along those lines. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I love Alan Watts, and this is where I think that a lot of Western audiences struggle with, because Watts was he was an Englishman, but he spent a lot of time in the East, and specifically studying Zen Buddhism and Taoism and those types of philosophies. And I enjoy those types of philosophies as well, because they're really an encapsulation of what I like about philosophy, right? Western philosophy, if you look at Plato and Aristotle and Descartes and all those guys, you know, that are in that area, it's all about answering the big questions. Well, where did everything come from? Where is everything going? What's the meaning of life? That type of stuff.
Yeah.
In the East, right, with Taoism and particularly with Taoism and Zen, um, it's really is about, um, well, it's kind of ineffable. It's something that you can't really put into words, but the best way you can sort of describe it is, um, it's kind of a journey. It's kind of a balance, but it's a balance that's paradoxical, right? And that's why you can't put it into words, is because anytime you go to say it, um, something that's the opposite is also true at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, oh, that's this weird contradictory thing. Um, and that's what I love about it. And that's what I think Watts was saying there, because in other lectures that he gave, he's very open about the fact that he's an intellectual, right? He's an academic. And he said, there's nothing wrong with being an intellectual or an academic. But the problem is, when you isolate your perspective and your lens on the world to academia, right, and to intellectualizing, you miss out on all of these other things that are happening,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think that's what he was trying to portray in that specific quote was, listen, if the only thing you do is think, then there's no room in your head for anything but thought. And you know can you really say that you're living at that point? And so this
Yeah.
kind of brings our conversation full circle to when you were asking me, what do you do, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, do I spend a lot of time thinking? Yes, right. But do I also spend a lot of time doing? Yes, and that's sort of a tenet of Zen and Tao is being in the moment with the things that you're pursuing. And so a lot of people, one of the questions I get a lot, right? Because I mentioned to you all of the things that I do, and usually I'm busy from sun up to sundown doing things and a very tight schedule. And they go, well, how do you sleep at night? Like, how, when you lay down, how is there not just a million things racing through your head?
Yeah.
And I go, well, it's just because I spend all of my time concentrating on the thing that I'm doing. And if I've done that thing to my best, if I've done the thing to the best of my ability, then I don't have anything to think about,
Mm-hmm.
even if I screwed up really bad, right? It's like I was saying earlier, did I learn something from it? Right? Can I move forward from it? Then there's no point in thinking about it anymore. I learned the lesson. I can, incorporate it next time. So when it comes time to go to bed, I can just think about taking a deep breath and relaxing and going to sleep, and that's what I do for eight
Yeah.
and a half hours every night. Um, so, so yeah, I, that's what I think that was the whole point. I think he's trying to make is not that there's no value in thinking, but that if you try to take an overly intellectual posture, kind of the way that Western philosophers have throughout history, then you end up being a grumpy old man.
And for everybody listening, Joel is not a grumpy old man. Not
No,
yet,
not
at
yet.
least. Yeah.
Yeah. This time.
Yeah. So, as we start to wrap up the show, and I really like, I loved your take on that. And, Alan Watts, he goes, like you said, he goes a lot deeper into a lot of his lectures. That's just a line I know that I've heard a million times. And it helped me actually to stop overthinking, to read into Zen, to read into meditation, to read into the silencing of the mind, the power of belief, was actually partially that line was, okay, yeah, I think all the time, and now it's created these biases and all this other stuff. But as we start to wrap up the show, and, Joel, this has been awesome. Before I ask this last final question, I'd say, this is totally different from most shows I've done, which is great because it's a different perspective, right? And so, I just want to thank you for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it, and I've enjoyed it a lot. And I'm glad that I could give a different perspective and keep things a little bit fresh.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you mentioned, for me, taking on a Zen practice really was another one of those milestone moments. Kind of like joining the army or joining a band or any of those other things. Because I was a very anxious person before that point. Like I mentioned, being highly competitive and being a perfectionist, just those two things without anything else piled on it is enough to just have your mind racing all the time.
Yeah.
And you're always living in the past or in the future. You're always thinking about things that you did that you shouldn't have done, or you're always thinking about things that you need to be afraid of or prepared for in the future. But that's a tenet of Zen and Tao philosophy, is that the past and the future don't exist, right? Which sounds crazy, but really, the only thing that exists is right now,
Yeah.
right? Anything that happened in the past, I have the ability to just ignore any of that stuff if I want to and be a different person today. And that's freeing, and anybody who's attempted any of those types of meditation will realize that it's really the hardest thing that you'll do in life. Because uh, the great Zen philosopher Dogen said, the same way your stomach secretes stomach acid, your mind secretes thoughts. And so trying to empty your mind of thoughts is impossible. You can't be done. But trying to quiet it and trying to understand that you allow the thoughts into your mind and you allow them to leave, and to just sort of create this flow, so that you can regulate and you can have some control over your internal world. It can have a big influence on how you interact with the outer world too.
Yeah, of course. Man, you just keep dropping these bombs on me. Joel, we gotta wrap this up. We could talk for hours, but I have to ask you one final question. And it's the theme of the show. Okay? What is something, just one thing, that you wish you knew earlier in life?
Yeah. I think if I had to sum it up, right, people have been listening to this whole conversation. They can probably think of a couple right off the bat. But but I'll go in a little bit of a different direction. But I think it really is sort of the source of all of them. And that is that it's not so serious. It's just not, it's not that big a deal. I think if I knew that earlier on, then all of the competitiveness and the perfectionism and the anxiety and all that other stuff that held me back before, that would have changed, uh, and it took being in the army to for me to sort of make that connection. And then later on Zen, and later on there's been several different things that have contributed to it. But the way that I sort of came to that knowledge was doing something very difficult in order to realize that all of those other things weren't difficult. But yeah, if I had just known earlier on that even that thing that I did, right, even the army and Vic Forge and all that stuff that I did that was very difficult and taught me those lessons, even that wasn't all that serious, right? It comes back to what's the meaning of life? Well, I make it. And if I make it, then why should I be worried about anything being too serious, right? I have the control to live life lightly. I have the control over not not having this oppressive, dark perspective, And I think that's something that I wish I would have known earlier.
Wow. That's a really, really good answer. Man. That's the biggest bomb of the show. Right there. Right there. And this is why I asked the question. This is why I made it the theme of the show, is because of answers like that. And that's so good.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. You've asked a lot of good questions. I do a lot of interviews, and you get used to hearing a lot of the same questions. No, not you. There was a lot of curveballs, a lot of things that as a somebody who thinks about philosophy and psychology a lot, I've thought about quite a bit.
Yeah.
But for sure, if I was just posing, I'd be in trouble because those are some deep questions.
That's the whole basis of the show, is to get to some of the deep stuff, but also to uncover the simplicities of the deep stuff. You know?
Yeah. And there's one of our Zen paradoxes for sure.
Exactly. So, Joel, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been amazing. Like I said, we could talk for days probably, but we need food and sleep and all that other stuff. But thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. And for everybody listening, I'm going to put all of Joel's information in the show notes. He has a podcast. It's all about philosophy. Go listen to it. Joel, what the name of your podcast again?
Yeah, it's From Nowhere to Nothing.
Yep. The greatest name that anyone could come up with. I was actually going to name this show that, and then I was like, Joel's already got it. But I'm going to put all of his information in the show notes so you guys can find him on anywhere podcast, listen to his podcast, find him on social media, find him everywhere. And for everybody listening, as always, keep smiling, keep striving, and I will catch you guys in the next episode.